We are in this series, Vital Signs, Finding Life While Slowly Dying. You and I are dying. One day we will be dead. But how do we live between now and then? How do we find the life that God has planned for us, the life abundant that He desires for us? How do we know that our heart is beating in the right direction? Well, last week we talked about the power of His life to restore relationships, to bring healing to relationships. And we looked at Barnabas and Paul, these two friends, closer than brothers, partners in crime, who split over an argument, over a pretty nasty argument. Paul was not okay trusting a guy named John Mark, and Barnabas said we should trust him. And they split over this argument, and the relationship fell apart. But what we see elsewhere in Scripture is even after that, they were able to speak well of one another. At some point, Paul had a change of heart, and he not only saw John Mark as a good guy, but as one desperately needed for ministry. And there was healing and reconciliation in that. And last week, I said, hey, if you want to find the life Jesus has, perhaps there are relationships that are broken you need to let be revived. You need healing to come in. You need those relationships to be restored. And you need to be the one to seek reconciliation. Well, the flip side of that coin is if you want to find the life He has, perhaps there are relationships in your life that you need to surrender. And maybe you actually need to let the relationship die. What does that look like? We live in a culture that is inundated with Christianity that tells us what Jesus wants all the time. And sometimes one of the lies our cultural Christianity tells us is that Jesus wants us to say yes to everybody all the time. It's not Christian of you to push people away. It's not loving God if you don't love me. And sometimes people place expectations upon us. They place demands upon us, things that are unrealistic, things that are unhealthy, things that we simply cannot or should not fulfill. What do we as Christians do to live the life God is giving to us and recognize all of these unhealthy demands and expectations in relationships? So to answer that question, I thought we'd look at Jesus specifically. But before we do, how many of you in here have kids with you today? How many of you managed to grab one of those bulletins for your kids to color and do some activities and stuff? How many of you did not and your kid would like one? Well, that would be my fault. I had them in my backpack and forgot to put them out until I was talking to somebody who was like, I was here last week for the first time and it was awesome, so I came with my kids this week. I was like, cool, let me take you to where your kids can get some nothing. Oops. So if you would like one, just raise your hand, and Shane, the guy in the red, he'll bring some by for your kids. These are activities that are based on today's lesson that they can engage with while they're coloring and learn about the stuff we're learning with too. See, every single month on the first Sunday of the month, we include kids in worship the entire time. And the reason for that is if we want our kids to believe what we believe, to be transformed the way we're transformed, to experience the God we experience, we have to be with our kids. But we also recognize kids learn differently. And so the rest of the month, when they're not in here with us, we have Kids Point for nursery all the way through 4th grade. This is our way of trying to do both teaching on their level and telling kids right now, you belong with us even now at this age. And if your kid is that one who's like really loud today, how many of you have kids and you're afraid that'll be your kid? Okay. If your kid's the one that's screaming and obnoxious and the people around you are like, dang, don't worry, it's probably going to be my kid before the morning's over, okay? If that's your kid, we still love them, and we're glad they're here. We believe in this place you can come as you are, and that means even your kids, if they're loud and screaming and obnoxious, we still love them. And if you need to step out for any reason, feel free, but you're also okay to be in here with kids that are not perfectly quiet all the time, because what kid is, okay? So with that now, how does Jesus handle expectations and demands in relationships that are unhealthy? We're going to begin today in Mark chapter 1. In Mark chapter 1, Jesus begins his ministry. He begins to do the things he was doing. He starts telling people, I am the one you're looking for. Behold, the kingdom of God is here. Repent, believe in the gospel. This good news. And as he goes, people who are sick and who are demon-possessed begin to come to him and get healing. What we see beginning in verse 32 is that at evening, at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick and oppressed by demons. And Jesus, he heals everybody who comes searching healing. He does these miraculous things. And then this next story. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and he went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. This is a pattern we see in Jesus time and time again. When things are getting heavy, when everything's getting real bad, when everything's really intense, he's doing miracles, healing the sick, raising the dead. Then what does he do? He just disappears, like the introvert he probably is. He just bails. He goes off by himself to seek his Father. And Simon, who's also called Peter, this disciple, he comes. Simon and those who were with him, they searched for Jesus. And this is what they say. They found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus, what are you doing out here in this desolate, lonely place? Why are you out here praying? Don't you know that everybody's looking for you? Everybody needs you. Everybody is coming to you because you're the one who can teach them and heal them and cast out demons. Like, they need you, Jesus. And Jesus responds by disappointing everybody. He says this, "Let us go on to the next town so that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he just gets up and they leave. He goes throughout Galilee preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. Could you imagine being there that morning? You're Simon Peter. You've got a busy night of watching the sick get healed and like, this is awesome. I don't know what's happening. It's kind of terrifying. Whoa. And you wake up in the morning, you're looking for your coffee. You're like, wait, where's Jesus? Okay, I've got my coffee, but where'd Jesus go? He was just here last night. And you finally find him out in the middle of nowhere by himself. You're like, dude, Jesus, everybody's waiting for you. What are you doing? Like, let's get this show on the road. We got stuff to do, important people to heal. Come on, Jesus. We need to do this great work. And Jesus is like, nope, I'm going to leave. I know that everybody's looking for me. I know that everybody's waiting for me, but I'm not here to heal the sick and cast out demons. I'm here to preach God's word. So I got to go to other towns and preach. What? You're supposed to love your neighbor, Jesus. Like, you of all people should care about those who are still sick, right? You should do something about this. Nope, I have something else I need to do. And he leaves. Sometimes we like to think about Jesus and all the ways he fulfills our expectations. So if you were one of the people that night before who came to Jesus and then he healed you, you're like, this guy's the best. But what if you're one of those people who comes to him in the morning? You're waiting in line, the line's too long, you don't get in that evening, you're like, okay, I'll just come back tomorrow. And tomorrow Jesus is gone, a sign on the door, sorry, see you later, I'm out. What? How's that loving to me, Jesus? How's that caring for me, Jesus? I need you right now, Jesus. Where are you right now for me? See, Jesus, he had a purpose and he had a mission. And while part of his purpose and part of his mission is to bring healing to all nations, his greater thing he was all about was going and sharing what his Father in heaven was doing. So he took time for himself and said, it's time for me to leave. I need to go somewhere else. A little bit later in the story, in chapter 6, Mark chapter 6, something else happens. Jesus, he looks at those who are following him and he says, hey, look, I want you to go and do this work that I've been doing. He calls the 12 together and he began to send them out 2 by 2 and he gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He said, you should go and cast out demons. If Jesus were here today and he stood before you and is like, hey, I want you to take your friend that you came here with and I want you to leave here and go and cast out demons. Who's excited about that? You're like, what? What does that even mean, Jesus? What do you mean? Like Emily Rose, head spinning around type thing? What do you mean, Jesus? He says, no. I want you guys to go and do the very things I've been doing. This very work that I've been about, that I've even been too busy to take time for, I want you to go and do this. Because you're my disciples. That's what my people do. Just go and do it. And he says, don't take nothing for your journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics. You see, you'd put on 2 tunics because what if one got a hole in it, right? Or what if on this long journey, you find somebody who needs one, you should give them one, then you both have one. So you got to take extra stuff. You got to be prepared for the work at hand. You've got to take time to get yourself ready. And sometimes in our walk with God, we feel the same way. Like, Jesus, I really want to do the things you're doing. I want to be about the things you're about. But first, I just got to be about me right now. So I'll get there eventually when I know more, when I'm more confident, when I'm more comfortable. I'll eventually do that thing you're telling me to do. I'll surrender then, but not yet. It's not time now. He says, look, go with no preparation, nothing, just simply go. And then he says to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you depart from there. Sometimes Jesus speaks and I'm like, what? Hey, whenever you go to a house, stay there until you leave. Thanks. And if any place will not receive you, and they will not listen to you when you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. See, the Jewish people had this custom. Anytime they entered into a Gentile land, a non-Jewish land, anytime they went to a place that was possibly unclean and sinful, when they left, they would shake off their dust as a symbolic representation. I am no longer sinful like those people. Now I'm clean again. Jesus says, look, anytime you go to a place and they don't receive you, just shake off the dust and move on. What? Shake off the dust and move on? Jesus, they're going to cast out demons. Like, certainly if somebody doesn't want them there, they should be there all the more, right? There's got to be some kind of demonic force that's like, you don't want to hear this. Get them away from here. No, Jesus says, look, there will be people who don't want you there. Don't worry about it. There will be people who don't like what you're saying. Don't worry about it. There will be people who won't like you. Don't worry about it. Just keep going. Shake off the dust and move on. I don't know what that does. It's buzzing. I don't know how to stop it. It's driving me nuts. So if I look distracted, that's why. Sorry. Shake it off. All right, here goes. I'll just stand over here. You see, Jesus sends out his disciples and he warns them, hey, not everybody will like you. I personally struggle with the need to be accepted. I've struggled with this from as long as I can remember. And so when I was a little kid, I was bullied all the time because I wanted to be like everybody else. But I don't know if you know this. If you try to be like everybody else, you're not really like anybody. And nobody really likes you because they don't know who you actually are. And I tried to be like everybody else, and so I was bullied a bunch. So my parents thought of this great solution. We'll just put him in karate, and then when they bully him, he could fight back, right? But of course, my need to be accepted is like, I can't fight back because they're not going to like me if I punch him in the face, all right? I don't know if you like people who punch you in the face. I don't. So I wouldn't even fight back because I was afraid, what if I fight back and then they're mad at me because I fought back? How dumb is that logic? But for a 12-year-old, it made sense, I guess. And this need to be accepted has put me in places in my life that weren't healthy. People have demands for me, and I'm afraid to say no. Like, what if I don't do what they want? What if I don't love them the way they say they need to be loved or care for them the way they say? What if I'm not there for them? Suddenly, because I'm not good enough for them, I don't do what they need, they're not going to know Jesus, and they're going to hell, and it's all going to be my fault. Has anybody else had a thought like that? Maybe not that extreme, but you're like, if I don't care for this person, who will? I have to, right? And it really just wears you out and drains you because they're people that just keep taking and taking and taking and abusing and abusing and abusing. And you're like, I don't know what to do, but I just keep going back. Maybe that was just me. Jesus says, look, if you go to a place and they don't receive you, just move on. There will be somebody else who needs the very thing you're doing, who needs the very message you're sharing, who needs the very thing you have to offer. Just move on. And then in this story, there's this brief interlude where it jumps to a story that happened before of John the Baptist being killed. And then it comes back in verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus. So he sends them out. He says, go and do the things I've been doing, casting out demons. And if people don't like you, don't worry about it. Just keep going. And then they come back and they tell him everything they had done and everything they had taught. Here's my report card, Jesus. Look at how good I did. Look at all the stuff I did. Don't you love me, Jesus? Look at me, Jesus. But then Jesus says something really great. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. The disciples, in their going, in their doing what Jesus said to do, were so busy working, so busy doing, they never had time to even stop and eat. Maybe you've tried to care for somebody like that. Like you're so busy caring for all of their needs, you get to the end of the day and you're like, did I eat today? I think so. Yeah, I must have eaten today, right? I had to have taken time for myself today, right? I must have. I don't remember though. The disciples were going and serving and doing as they were supposed to do in such a way that they were so crowded, so overworked, so overbusy, they never had time to even get away and rest. And Jesus said, hey, look, that's all that stuff you did is good. Now it's time to come and rest. Come and eat. Let's get away from here. You need a break. Let's go. Did you know that it's okay for you as a Christian to take a break from relationships? It's okay for you to say, I need to take care of me right now. I'm not super healthy, and I can't help you if I'm falling apart myself. The disciples, at Jesus' request, at his invitation, they go to sneak away to this private place, and then something happens. They went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Can you imagine being the disciples? You're like doing, going. You're just loving everybody you can love. You're worn out, you're exhausted. And Jesus is like, hey, take a break. It's going to be okay. Let's just go, me and you, we'll just go get away. And as you're going, everybody sees you and they just rush there and they get there first. And you show up, you go to get out of that boat, and you're like, crap. God, I thought this was me time. I thought it was time for me to get away. What do you mean? Look at all these people here who have expectations and demands and needs, things they want from me. Come on, God. Something great happens. It says when Jesus went to shore and he saw a great crowd, he had compassion on them. Jesus didn't turn to the disciples and say, hey, you take care of their needs. No, he's like, I've got this. You guys just rest. Now, we don't know what they're doing. We don't see, do they get out of the boat? Do they stay in the boat? Do they try to sneak away and hide under a tree and hope nobody knows them? Do they interact with all the people? We don't know. But we know this, Jesus has compassion. And in his compassion, he begins to care for the needs of these people. And as he begins to care for the needs of these people, the day goes on. What was supposed to be restful, now they find it's evening. And it says this, and when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. They're like, look, we came here to get away and eat. This crowd followed. We don't want to take time with them, Jesus. Send them away so they can eat. And Jesus responds, he says, you give them something to eat. You feed them. And what we know from what comes later is that there are over 5,000 men there. Have you ever tried to feed a group of 5,000 men? Have you ever tried to feed a group of 5 men? We will eat everything in your house, and then we'll ask for more. And there's 5,000 men, probably families with them. Jesus says, you guys feed them. Oh, Jesus, we came to get away. We came for a break. We came because we're hungry. When is it my turn, Jesus? And so Jesus does this great thing. He says, well, how much do you have? What do you have right now? And they said, well, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus says, okay, that's enough. And he prays, he thanks God, and he says, now just go and feed people. And they take these 5 loaves and 2 fish. And I just wonder, these 12 guys, we're not even going to be full with 5 loaves. What do you mean feed these people? Whatever, Jesus. And they go and they just start breaking it and handing it to people. And then everybody eats. And he says, hey, now collect all the leftovers. And they collect them, and there's 12 baskets of leftovers. In abundance, far beyond what they could have ever imagined. I wonder for the disciples what they're thinking. Jesus, we just did all this great work. We were here for us. We needed a break. And then you had to go and have compassion on these people, Jesus. Like, if it was up to me, I would have just told them, come back tomorrow, Jesus. But you had to care for them. And in Jesus' compassion, do you know what happens? They're provided for far more than the disciples ever could have. See, sometimes you and I want to try to do things on our own and make it happen ourselves, and we look to what we can do. When Jesus said, go and feed them, the disciples responded, don't you know that'll cost us 200 denarii? Like 200 days worth of wages? That's that's 2/3 of our year, God. We can't afford to pay them or feed them. Sometimes when it comes to caring for our relationships and the people around us and doing the things Jesus has called us to do, we look at ourselves and say, this is impossible. This can't be done. And the reason we need to surrender relationships and let relationships die and just shake the dust off of some relationships is so that Jesus can begin to be the one to care for people. So that he can be the one to provide for their every need, to show them the love that they need, so that he can do what he does best. You might be saying, well, this is all good and great, but those are the disciples. What about me? You know what we see Jesus do immediately next? As soon as he feeds all these people, he sends the disciples back into a boat and he dismisses the crowd and he goes to a desolate place by himself. Time and time and time again, we see Jesus go off by himself and have me time. Expectations, demands, people wanting things from him. He says, nope, right now, it's about me and my Father and connecting with him. See, you and I, we will always have people in our lives like this crowd who will see us in our moment of weakness and our need for rest, and they will go running with all of their expectations and demands and things they want to place upon us. You and I cannot satisfy every expectation. We cannot fulfill every need. We cannot be what everybody else wants us to be. And sometimes we just need to admit that. Say, God, I can't do this right now. I don't have what it takes to be that right now. I need to rest. I need to eat. I need to connect with you and recharge, not so I can stay here and do nothing, but so eventually I can love again. See, I don't know what broken relationships you have in your world. Some relationships you should pursue until the day you die and say, I will always do whatever I can to restore this. If you made the commitment to get married, you should do everything in your power to say, how do I strengthen this marriage and heal this brokenness and make it better? But you know what? If you're not in that oath and under that bond, there are probably friendships and coworkers and bosses who expect you to be far more than you can ever be. You need to be the one who answers every email, every text message. You need to be the one who's there for my every problem, who provides for my every physical need. You need to give more. And sometimes these relationships can be quite toxic. And instead of you helping them, what they become is dependent upon you. And dependent relationships are not healthy. Now, if you have kids, how many of you have kids or want to have kids or have kids you know about, right? If you've ever been around kids, every one of us is born dependent. We have to rely on somebody else. But part of the process of growing is learning to become independent, to take responsibility and ownership for me and say, I need rest. I need to be healthy. And then the next step where we sometimes fail to go is move beyond independence into interdependence. We need each other. I can't just do this by myself. If there's someone in your life, a relationship that's broken, you're trying to heal, and you've been trying to do it out of all of your strength and your understanding and your knowledge and your ability, maybe today you need to let that die and simply say, I can't fix this, but I can turn to people who can help me. I can turn to people who can give me good advice on what's next. I can turn to people who can pour into me and make sure that even as I'm loving this person, I'm healthy and taking care of my own emotional and spiritual needs. See, if we try to do it only on our own, we will get burnt out. If we try to do it according to what everybody else says we need to do, we will get burned out. Do you know what good a burned out candle is? It's not. It doesn't do a whole lot of good for heat or light, or even making the room smell better when it's burned out. If you're in relationships that are expecting too much from you, that are toxic and beating you down and wearing you down, it is good to say no. See, you will in your life disappoint a lot of people. Did you know that? You will always disappoint somebody. But it's important to say who is worth disappointing. See, there are relationships that are more important and less important. And I hope you choose to disappoint the people that are less important so that you don't disappoint the ones that are more important. Your boss should be a lesser priority than your children or your spouse or your parents or your siblings. But you know, sometimes it's not just actual relationships that are unhealthy. Sometimes we can have unhealthy expectations and unhealthy relationships with imaginary relationships. And I don't mean like your imaginary friend that you had when you were a kid, but those relationships that don't really exist, but you wish they did. I wish my son would call me, but he never does. I wish that I was married, but I find myself in my 30s and I'm still single, so maybe I'll just make this next relationship the right one. I wish that my husband or my wife loved me more, so maybe I'll find somebody who does love me more. And we can build up these relationships that are entirely built on our own expectation and desire that are really unhealthy. And if we want to find the life Jesus has, not only do we need to let those real relationships fall apart and die when they're unhealthy, we need to let those imaginary ones die too. And embrace what is. My relationship with my children is not good. Now what? My relationship with my spouse is not healthy. Now what? My relationship with my boss is not healthy. Now what? See, to find the life that he wants us to have, we have to sometimes let things die. That's not comfortable. It's not easy. And sometimes we feel this guilt and shame. What if I should have loved them more? But Jesus regularly said no to people, and he walked away. Last week, somebody texted in the question about reconciliation. How often should you try to reconcile? And I answered, as often as possible. And afterwards, somebody approached me and said, now, surely you didn't mean like abusive relationships, right? So let me clarify a misunderstanding in our culture. To reconcile with somebody does not mean that you get back together and that relationship looks like it did before. No, in fact, reconciliation, the relationship should look different. Because to reconcile is to say, we're going to address the sin and we're going to forgive the sin, but then we're also going to set boundaries that say this sin is not good. So if you're in an abusive relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, a spouse, even if your boss is abusing you verbally or emotionally or physically, if you're in that relationship, sometimes the best thing you can do to reconcile is to say, no longer is this okay. And if you're going to continue to insist on being like this, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to do what's right for me. And when you need me, I'm not here because of this. And reconciliation and forgiveness is learning to say, I don't have any ill wishes towards you. I don't want anything bad to happen to you, even if you and I should not be in any kind of relationship. That's okay. If you're here today and you're like, this is all good and great, but now what? Like, I understand I should shake the dust off, but have you ever tried to shake mud off? Mud doesn't always shake off real easily. Dust, sure, fine. I just slap my sandals together, I'm good. But mud, my life is really muddy from all the brokenness that I have walked through. You know what? Sometimes it doesn't shake off easily. And sometimes you can't do it alone. And sometimes to say no to the unhealthy things so that you can say yes to the healthy things requires other people to help you. And that's why we're here, church. To help each one of you, all of us together, to help us say, how do we say no to the unhealthy bad stuff so that we can say yes to the good? Not everybody will like you. Not everybody will like the no's that you say. Not everybody will like the way you choose to live differently. But you get to choose who you're loving and how you're loving them and what that looks like. There's a couple of really good books. Obviously, always go to the Bible. The Bible's really good, all right? I'll tell you that. It'll do some good things for you. If you're struggling, you're like, what do I do? Turn to Jesus. He probably knows better than I do, guaranteed, every time. But sometimes there's some other books that can be helpful. If you're here and your relationships are a broken mess and people walk all over you and you don't know how to say no and there's this toxic relationship that drains all of your energy and you don't even take time to eat because of that relationship, I'd recommend a book called Boundaries. If you've never read this book, Boundaries, explains how a Christian can set good boundaries and say, that is not my burden to bear, but yours. There are times when we should carry one another's burdens, and there are times when your burden is not my problem. If you choose to go buy a Lamborghini and then you're wondering why you have no money to eat bread, that's not my problem. Sell your Lamborghini, okay? But if you've worked really hard and somebody took your money and now you're like, I can't feed my kids, hey, that's a burden I should share when you've been oppressed by someone else. When you've experienced loss that's not caused by anything you've done, that's something I should help you with. Boundaries is a great book to help you say, where am I healthy and where am I not? What relationships do I need to say yes to and which ones do I need to say no to? You see, if the disciples never took time away, if they never took time to rest, if Jesus didn't stop to connect with his Father, he would not have done the work he's doing, or he did at all. If he had said yes to everybody, he would have stayed in one town indefinitely, as opposed to going and sharing with all the people, this is who I am and what I've done. You need a boundary to say, this relationship is not good. Another really good book that I recommend is this book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. If you're somebody who likes to read, pick these up. This book is just all about how do you recognize when you're being unhealthy and you're expecting from others more than they can give you. See, nobody will fulfill you, not your spouse, not your friend, not your boss, the way Jesus can and needs to. And if you're looking to all of them for that fulfillment, those relationships might be bad. For Emily, she shared about that relationship with this boy. She's like, I'm smitten with him, but things aren't good. Jesus, I surrender. And what did Jesus do? He took it away. And that hurts. Like, anybody have a Band-Aid ripped off? That's not pleasant. You have a wound ripped open? That sucks. But if you've got an infection, you can only heal it once you first clean it out. And you and I probably have infectious, unhealthy relationships that if we don't first allow Jesus to clean them out, we can't ever find healing and then begin to experience what now and what next. So if you're not a reader, you don't like either of those two books, that's fine. I don't care. If you like them, go for them. Feel free to pick them up. They have been helpful for me as somebody who always feels the need to say yes to everyone, to learn how to say and when to say, this is not good. No, I'm going to focus on what's best. I'm going to finish with this because I see some of you are ready to be done. Hey, you're still listening. It is okay. In fact, it's really good to let relationships die. And my question for you is this. Who has an expectation of you? A desire for you? Who has something they need from you that you simply cannot give? How do you surrender that to Jesus? Maybe you can't give it because you don't yet have it, and you need him to give it to you, and later you'll be able to give it to them. Or maybe somebody else down the line who's even a better option, like Tyler is way better than the guy I've never met from before in Emily's life. I just know that because I like Tyler and he's a great guy, right? Maybe God has something or someone, a relationship even better. And maybe for those imaginary relationships, you won't ever get it back. And you want to be married and you remain single. That's not the end of the world. You're not identified by your singleness. You're not made somebody special because you have a spouse, because there's a lot of people that are married that are not special to me. Do you know that? And they're not special to other people in the same way that they want to be. When we make relationships our idol and we don't let them die, it creates a cancer in us that can kill the relationships that are healthy.